Hi everyone, I am Waldemar Fontes, and it's a pleasure to be in this meeting. I would like to thank the organizer for the opportunity to expose, and all the people hearing this presentation titled The National Identity and the Uruguay's Links to Antarctica. Uruguay's link with Antarctica. Since its founding, the port of Montevideo has played a significant part in connecting the national territory with the southern and Antarctic regions. However, historical evolution introduced various events that made most of the population of the Oriental Republic of Uruguay unaware that it was heir to this projection. And even though the country has had permanent settlements in Antarctica since 1984, it is still difficult for most of its population to understand the concept of a Uruguayan Antarctic identity. The linkage of the national territory to the seas of the southern Atlantic Ocean arises naturally from the time of the Spanish colony, even with the presence of explorers of other nationalities and pirates who ventured from our coasts heading south. With the foundation of the city of Montevideo in 1724, the bases of a local maritime vocation were placed, and it was reinforced from 1776, when the Montevideo's naval station was established, and then later the Royal Maritime Company was founded for exploiting the whale and fishing industry in all the seas of Spain's domain. From the naval station, the Spanish fleet controlled the Rio de la Plata entrance and dominated the maritime area between Montevideo, the Malvinas Islands, and Puerto Deseado, which was the key to the navigation routes from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Strait of Magellan and Cape Horn. From these coasts, ships sailed that reached Antarctic latitudes, crewed by Rio de la Plata seafarers, born in Montevideo and its surroundings. Spain's maritime predominance in these latitudes was kept until 1806, when the English invasions occurred, taking first Maldonado and then occupying Montevideo. By 1811 the Independence War had begun, and the authorities that governed the territory known as the Banda Oriental by those years lost interest in maritime activities, focusing on the wars that lasted for years, although whaling and sea lion hunting continued independently. Around 1820, the discovery of the Antarctic continent was confirmed, and there was a boom in sea lion and seal exploitation, with the arrival of ships that docked on these coasts in search of supplies, crews, and repairs. By the end of the 19th century, with the beginning of the heroic era of Antarctic exploration, there was already a complete logistic structure in Montevideo linked to whaling and sealing activity, including the continuous presence of Norwegian, British, American, and other fleets operating from Montevideo port, allowing to confirm that by that time numerous Uruguayan seamen had acquired experience in navigation to the South Polar, as demonstrated by the quick preparation of the national expedition to South in 1916, in the middle of the Austral winter, sailing to attempt to rescue the survivors from the Shackleton's famous expedition. In the second half of the 20th century, the country materialized its complete participation in the Antarctic Treaty regime, founding the National Antarctic Program, which manages scientific, organization, and educational activities, in a process that has been gradually consolidating. At the first Conference on Antarctic Social Sciences and Humanities, held in Buenos Aires in 2021, the paper Verses Coming from the Cold, Looking for the Uruguayan Antarctic Geopoetics, where's the question if are there any geopoetics from Antarctic regions? It detailed a series of Uruguayan authors who had ventured into poetry related to the cold, the south, the Austral Sea, and the Antarctic, establishing that the south wind, the whales, the polar cold, and the arrival of Antarctic ships to Uruguayan ports have always been sources of inspiration for all genres of poets and artists. The physical journey to the polar regions will always be difficult, and although some authors could visit them, most can only travel with their imagination, describing places and adventures that happen to others with a melancholic Rio de la Plata look, distinctive from any other artistic interpretations. The Scottish poet Kenneth White, creator of the geopoetics concept, mentioned that naming landscapes implies appropriating them, as did the Uruguayan essayist Fernando Ainsa in his book From the Topos to the Logos. Geopoetics proposals said it is necessary to appropriate the environment through words, trying to understand it and then transform the wild nature into landscapes. Imagining Antarctica. Our north is south, the allegory of the Uruguayan painter Joaquin Torres Garcia, who created the School of South in the 1940s, toured the world with this famous phrase, "I said School of South because really our north is south. There should be north for us, but by opposition to our south. Therefore now we put the map upside down, and then we have a fair idea of our position, and not as they want it in the rest of the world. Tip South America from now extending points insistently south, our north." The juxtaposition of south with north inspired the poem of Mario Benedetti, "The South Also Exists," that was sung by Joan Manuel Serrat, mixing social demands with geopoetic truths and putting in place cultural realities that must be considered. In reference to these cultural aspects, Professor Julio C. Musso, trying to convince his contemporaries, explained that the advance towards Antarctica involved a cultural shock, whether in their authentic legal formulations, artistic, folkloric, or even idiomatic, expressing that it was necessary to move the focus, and that people should change the traditional folkloric conceptions that only painted characters like the gaucho and open up and incorporate new types, such as the sailor who arrives at the port, the fishermen, and the explorers who would venture beyond the horizon of the Rio de la Plata, and continued saying in his book, Uruguayan Antarctica, "Antarctica is a promise of fierce work for nationals, who will always be encouraged by the Artigas slogan of enlightenment and courage. That courage, originally military, will be transformed into scientific, technical, and artistic valor." What is the Uruguayan Antarctic identity? To find a specific identity, it is necessary to understand first the concept of national identity. In the article, The Itinerary of Uruguayan Identity, the author analyzes the advance of the concept from the creation of the Republic, highlighting the importance of geopoetic contributions for the consolidation of the state, saying, "It is necessary to fill this abstract discourse with content, to bring the political project closer to a scarce population, dispersed in a territory without defined limits. From the literary discourse, poetry, painting, and history, the literate elites of the Montevideo Patriciate will assume the task of the first national construction. The state, in modernization, will contribute to unify languages and to settle the meaning of semantic polyphony." By other hand, in a study on identity, national defense, and values, the author, analyzing the changes that occurred over time, says, "National identity is not defined as an unchangeable essence, but rather as a permanent historical process of construction and reconstruction of the imagined community that is the nation. Then the alterations caused by cultural globalization and different socialization agents in its constituent elements do not necessarily imply that national identity has been lost, but rather that it has changed, that it is being built over time. Therefore, we can affirm that the process of cultural globalization is a particularly worthy cause in changing our national identity." The concept of Uruguayan national identity can be considered recent and still in confirmation. However, national Antarctic identity is something that is prior. It arises from the origins of the territorial imaginary that included those who inhabited the southern coasts of the Oriental Republic of Uruguay, and is associated with vision from the mainland to the maritime horizon extending south, as a source of curiosity, as a navigation via, and as the origin of the south wind and cold polar freeze that always lashed this territory. Conclusion. The original inhabitants who travelled these coasts did not venture into the sea because they had everything at their disposal inland, or sailing Parana and Uruguay rivers, and possibly this way of life back to the sea influenced future inhabitants who until today see south as horizon belonging to other. At beginning of the 20th century, the port of Montevideo played a highly active role during the heroic era of Antarctic exploration, and the press described heroic feats of the Charcot, Gerlache, or Amundsen expeditions, besides the national attempt to rescue the survivors of the Shackleton failed journey, with exalted poetic moods. The Uruguayan Antarctic identity exists in its inhabitants' subconscious, and since the Spanish colony times, there are abundant testimonies in art and culture trying to incorporate the effects of the southern wind coming from the pole and looking for what is there beyond the austral horizon. It is necessary to keep researching to find those links, describing and reaffirming them to contribute generate an Antarctic identity that helps to protect the aesthetics and intrinsic values of Antarctica and its area's influence. Thank you very much for your attention. You can address questions or concerns to the mailfontes@gmail.com. See you.
La Antártida, un altar es de los vientos, estanque de agua dulce en cristal roca, el reino del petrel y errante albatros donde se incuba la esperanza en las auroras.